for me, one of the good points was how technology is perceived, right? Imagine the parent Anganwadi groups, right? Let's say there are 100,000 groups that we have. About 50% of the parents believe that it's the Anganwadi worker who's sending the content, even if it's automated. I think we don't really read into perception of technology that much, but it works fantastically for us. I mean, if the credit goes to the Anganwadi worker, nothing like it, right?
Hello, my name is Pranav Kothari. I'm the CEO of Educational Initiatives. We make assessments and an adaptive learning software to ensure that every child learns with understanding. Welcome to EI Dialogues. EI Dialogues is our endeavor to bring conversations that are insightful, long-form, detailed about the why, what, where, when, as leaders in the education sector have embarked on their journeys, built their organizations, and are marching towards their mission. Today, I'm glad to have Siddhant Sachdeva and Azeez Gupta, co-founders of Rocket Learning, on this show. Welcome, Siddhant. Welcome, Azeez. Glad to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Pranav.
Hi, Pranav. Real pleasure, and so happy to be on EI Dialogues.
Thank you. Thank you for joining. Siddhant would love to hear a little bit about what Rocket Learning does, who does it serve, what problem are you solving?
Yeah. Rocket Learning basically focuses on early childhood education. We work very deeply with parents, caregivers, Anganwadi workers, as well as governments to make sure that the child gets a very good learning journey. We mostly work with 3 to 8-year-old children. 3 to 6-year-old children go to Anganwadis and as well as schools as well. And our hope is that parents, caregivers, as well as Anganwadis are engaged in a child's educational journey.
What is an Anganwadi, and can you paint the profile of an Anganwadi worker?
Sure. An Anganwadi is, imagine a village where there's a center inside the village where families go for nutritional, educational, vaccination and other needs. An Anganwadi worker belongs to that community, is usually a 45 to 55-year-old woman who is part of that community, has spent 20, 30 years there. And I think ECE, early childhood education, is one of the responsibilities of an Anganwadi worker.
I'm assuming the trust in the Anganwadi worker would be high, right? Because she's from the community, she was there from the pregnancy, helped through a very important phase of child nutrition, getting the vaccination. So this is a human being that the parents feel comfortable leaving a 3-year-old with when they are sort of the education part of the responsibility.
Absolutely. And these are local influencers. They're local trusted people, right? And she's been with the mother since pregnancy, guided her through, given ration when the child is sort of 1-year-old and so on, right? So I think there's a lot of trust. I think what often is not there is respect for the Anganwadi worker as an educator. Right? Because the system isn't known as a learning system, center isn't known as a learning center, right? And that's contrary to the government school, right? In government schools, there's a lot of negativity, right? People say teachers don't come, this, that, but they don't normally question qualifications. And here, because there's been no formal curriculum, there's been no books, there's been no content, and the Anganwadi worker hasn't been framed and branded and perceived as a educator, right? So that's the missing gap, and that's one of the things that we are looking to help solve.
And how does that impact the mechanics of what the Anganwadi does and what happens to the students? So if parents don't trust the person's ability to educate their children, but they still send them because I guess they have a need for someone to take care during the day, does that have an impact in terms of the motivation of the Anganwadi worker in terms of what he or she does?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. Right? I think there are a few implications of this. One is that any parent who can afford it and believes that early childhood education is important is trying to send the kid to a private preschool. And many of those have opened up, right? So the kids who end up going to the Anganwadi are really the most where the parents are the poorest, or they don't actually know anything sort of better. And on the other side, right, the Anganwadi worker feels that we can do a good job of teaching, but our kids are being taken away, right? So it's almost an existential threat for them. And I think that's why the Anganwadi worker as a sort of as a persona is very different from the primary school teacher as a persona. She's of course paid much less, etc. But in that way, her motivation to be trained and upskilled and to practice the art of teaching is actually much, much higher, because that raises her profile, her prestige. It increases the people coming to her, it increases the people around saying कि देखो आंगनवाड़ी में पढ़ाई हो रही है, right? So the आंगनवाड़ी workers से मैं 25 साल सर्विस हो गई है, लेकिन मुझे कभी करिकुलम नहीं दिया गया और मुझे कभी बोला नहीं क्या कैसे पढ़ाना है. मैं कोई स्टोरीज राइम्स मैं करती हूँ, I do my best, but nobody feels that I'm doing anything.
So intention and will is very high, but skill is sort of variable depending on what they have gotten. We live in a country where to get admission into an IIT, people are willing to mortgage, quote unquote, sell a kidney. Willingness to pay for education at high grade levels is very high. A lot of our work is grades 1 to 10, and we can see that willingness to pay for grade 3 is much lower than sort of grade 9 or 10. Continuing that logical spectrum, I'm assuming that early childhood education, the emphasis or the felt reality need for providing your children with high quality education must be low, right? In the sense, people will be thinking, 3 साल का बच्चा है, क्या फर्क पड़ता है, पढ़े नहीं पढ़े, right? Do you face that? How do you tackle that? And
yeah, I think that is there. Though I think at the early years, you also have to consider that families want someone to take care of the child for some hours.
Right.
So I think that
right.
sense is also there.
I get the argument for daycare
as
an extremely high need. But I'm questioning, are people paying attention to the educational sort of part of it, given that, literally it's a 4-year-old.
You're perfectly right for, let's say, 3-4-year-old children, where at that age, the next milestone is not very clear. But I think at 4 or 5, the next milestone, which is grade 1 admission, if it starts becoming real, and there are a lot of private schools as well as government schools who do demand a certain level of sort of skill there, right? I think that starts becoming a real thing as parents start engaging with, what will happen at grade 1.
So literally the motivation for sending to a private Anganwadi is that they are qualified to get admission into a private grade 1 school.
Yeah, that's one thing. I think the other thing which should be there is that readiness for grade 1 for the child should also be there, right? You're setting the child up for something which he or she can actually digest and consume from grade 1 onwards. But that's a behavior change journey. That doesn't really happen overnight. It's not there right now.
I think adding on to that, we do hear, khelne koodne ke din hai. These are times for the kids to play. Why are we bothering at this point, right? We see this in availability of phones. We work, we work with parents closely as well, and we'll talk about that more. But the availability, like the time, the family phone in terms of times, that is given to the class 10th kid versus the sort of age 5 kid is very different. So these are real challenges, and in fact, we've been trying to engage with governments on saying that there is a need for mass awareness and advocacy campaigns. Research shows that the NEP says 85% of brain development happens by 6, right, or 8, and so in the same way that a school chale hum happened and all of that, right? Can we talk about preschool and how that's important and how that will build intelligence, brain capacity, IQ points, and so parents really understand that, look, my kids are losing out by the age of 6. I am condemning my child to a life where he or she is X IQ points behind this other rich child, and all I need to sort of do to solve it is to sort of engage more deeply in the kid's learning, because in fact, this is the only age where I can actually be involved. In class 10th, I'm not going to be able to really help, but now I actually can.
And how did you stumble upon this? Why did you pick this age group? Why did you pick working with the Anganwadi worker? What was your motivation to start Rocket and work with these?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first is we have to look at the child's journey in a day, right? Where is the child spending time? The child can spend, let's say, 2 hours, 3 hours in an Anganwadi or a daycare center, but majority of the time is spent at home, right? I think it's an incomplete solution to talk about a child's learning journey only in the context of, let's say, a daycare center or an Anganwadi, right? So parents have to be a big part of it. I think the macro effects of smartphone penetration in India and technology being more ubiquitous, I think definitely sort of helped us launch there. The loop between what's happening at home and what's happening inside the Anganwadi also is a very complete, it has to be thought of as a complete loop. And that's why we also started focusing on what's happening inside the Anganwadi. Again, sort of understanding the Anganwadi helped us a lot, right? So we spent a lot of long hours just talking to Anganwadis about what they really want in life. But I think we found huge sort of motivation there. So I think that was also something that kept us going.
Motivation to learn, to grow, upskill. Now, in terms of the 13:1 or the fact that, by age 6 a lot of development happened, what's the biological science behind that? Like, why is age 3 to 6 so important? Like, biologically, what's happening in the brain or body?
Yeah, I think, in fact, there's a lovely video by the Harvard Center for the Developing Child. I'll share that. That can be in the program notes as well. But basically, it shows how brain connections are actually forming between different parts of the brain, right? New neural connections are happening at this age, right? At the rate of sort of millions and millions per day. And I think what that leads to is development of very critical skills, right? For example, executive function, things like working memory, things like, are you able to sort of remember things, keep them in your mind, and then parse them logically through your mind, right? Or simple social emotional skills, self-awareness, knowing and understanding your emotions. So I think on the point that you mentioned earlier, right, why did we focus on this? One of the reasons is policy started focusing on it. One of the reasons policy focused is because the neuroscience research finally caught up, right? And it said conclusively that neural connections are forming here. If they don't form here, they're not going to form later. That's why we believe that at this point, now that policy has finally caught up and is finally saying that the NEP says that early childhood education is the single biggest and most powerful equalizer. Right? And I think now finally people in states and districts in the center are looking at it, and it's our job to just keep hammering that message.
So policy says it, research says it, NEP is saying it, so your job is done, right? I mean, it's easy, right? Like, now it's all downhill.
Yeah, I think in India, I think we have to work with center, state, district, right? I think we have had the fortune of working at all levels. So I think there is good momentum at the policy level. I think it has to translate to actionable missions and policies at the center, right? Which is also a journey in itself. I think you can look for that one idea which will define the next sort of 100 years, or you can look for the one idea which will define the next 10 years and actually make it happen. All right, so that's the focus at the center level, right? But then translating it to state and districts has also been a learning journey for us. I think we started our work with pilots at districts. We saw what is actually possible at the district level. We also understood what gaps exist there when we are implementing things with the government, right? So I think working closely with the government has given us that at least glimpse of what that journey has to look like. It's a long journey.
And what government is this? What ministry, what department, what function does this fall under?
So this is the Anganwadis roll up to the WCD ministry, right?
Which is the
Women and Child Development Ministry, yeah. Absolutely. And so that's the department which runs the Integrated Child Development Services, the ICDS, under which the Anganwadis have fallen, right? So that ministry pays for it, center state pay. Typically one of the interesting things is that ministry doesn't actually have either the perception or the reality of knowing education, right? I mean, they don't also feel necessarily that we are education experts. So I think the willingness to partner is quite high.
And is that because health just takes priority over education? I mean, infant mortality is just so much more important, and nutrition is so much more important than ability to decipher letters and numbers? Is that
well? I think importance. Well, I guess that depends. But I think
say order of priority.
I think in terms of
hierarchy.
Priority. I think malnutrition and so on have been considered critical at this age, right? Because I think there's not been enough evidence that stimulation is also important at this age. Right? वो तो school का काम है. It'll start in grade 1, and we have the system for grade 1, so let it do it.
And it's also not visible, nah? Like it's very visible if a child is, let's say, skinny, as opposed to not being able to see that billions of neurons are not firing, right? I'm assuming that's...
I think that's a classic education problem throughout. I think what we today have as a country is the permission to do something in this space. That's what's been won over 30 years of people pushing for this, right? It's just a permission. The NEP is this overarching permission/mandate that do something, and then you have to make it into actionable policy at the central level. That's how we think about it. And then help the state actually make it into structural reform initiatives, and then help the district execute those initiatives. And you can't have one without the other, right?
So what exactly do you do to sort of, plug into the system? Like, what does Rocket Learning do? What modes of communication do you use? How do you embed yourselves?
Yeah, so I think technology plays a huge part in it. So let's say there's an Anganwadi worker who's doing activities in the Anganwadi. They might be doing a set of activities earlier. Now they're getting fresh set of activities via technology delivered on their smartphone, and they just sort of look at it and they can do those in the Anganwadi, let's say, the next day. Now what happens is we ask them to engage on our platform. Once they engage, I think we at least know it no longer is a black box. Once they engage, we have data. We have data to say where it's working, where it's not working.
So it's like they send you a message, you reply them on message, and that's how you measure engagement.
Correct. And it's a group model. So it's the group of a supervisor where all Anganwadis are there and all of them are being asked. And I think we are building on an existing community. So the supervisor Anganwadi group is an existing community. You're not building a new community.
Correct.
There's already familiarity there. So
just
that
plugging into those channels.
So these 2 layers of groups, parents, 10 parents with one Anganwadi worker, 20 Anganwadi workers with one supervisor. These 2 layers. And I think what we've seen is that peer effects work for the intrinsic motivation aspect, right? Extrinsic motivation, right? Recognition by your boss, either the teacher or the supervisor helps, right? They're facilitators, they're on the group. The relationship is not like computer and a child. Relationship is a sort of community-based relationship, right? And in fact, one of the most interesting things on the aha moments, right? I remember in the early days, one of the aha moments was that, we said, look, parents care about children's education. That's a very core belief. Many parents do, right? And if you give them the power to do it, they will make sure it happens. And so we used to send like fairly boring content, right? Do this activity, right? Video wasn't very funny, very interesting, and we said that, but the parent is just going to see it at a 1-minute level and that's it. And then we saw that if the child, always the parent shows it to the child, they watch it together. And if it's not interesting, if it's not colorful, if it's not fun, if the activity itself that you ask them to do is not fun, the child will kick and scream, and finally the most motivated parent will say, you just do your thing, I'm not going to sort of get into it, right? And so making it fun, and so I think that's the complexity, right? Multiple stakeholders, multiple incentives, how do you sort of build in things that work for each of them in different ways?
But how do you tackle low parent literacy levels in terms of if you send them, I can understand if you send them a video, they're able to see you, listen to you, understand.
Yeah.
But when it comes to, let's say, writing or reading, that must be hard for a set of parents of first generational learners, no?
Yeah. I think, so 70% of the mothers or primary caregivers who we serve are educated till, let's say, class 5. So largely, I think they are aware, but yes, we do find parents also learning with the videos. I think there is a huge element of building confidence in caregivers as well. So we have to tackle that head on. We have to understand that how many percentage of our caregivers are not confident enough, right, in their teaching, and then say that, it's possible. See, this is a story of a mother who's doing it.
What has been some of, non-intuitive or counterintuitive insights as you've done this work? Like, what surprised you?
I think for me, one of the good points was how technology is perceived, right? So a lot of our, imagine the parent Anganwadi groups, right? Let's say there are 100,000 groups that we have. About 50% of the parents believe that it's the Anganwadi worker who's sending the content, even if it's automated. I think we don't really read into perception of technology that much, but it works fantastically for us. If the credit goes to the Anganwadi worker, nothing like it, right? So they reply with, thank you ma'am, aapne ye bhej diya, which is like a very good thing, right? I think the challenging thing for me is we are, I think, unfortunately competing in terms of content with the likes of YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, and so on. So short form content while talking about a serious topic, I think it's a tricky thing. But unfortunately, we have to live with that reality and sort of customize our content accordingly as well.
But that was the surprising thing, right? All said and done. So for example, any videos, if you go on any platform for education made by educators, will be long. Sesame Street originally had 30-minute, 60-minute videos. Khan Academy has 3-4 minute videos. These are all great organizations which had made it for the context, and it worked in that context. Now today, with YouTube Shorts and other things coming in, right, attention span is not sort of variable, right? That for education, my attention span is 30 minutes, but for the YouTube short, if I don't like it in 20 seconds, I will flip up, right? So we've done a lot of on-ground observational stuff of people engaging with our content, right? And we see that like 50 seconds is other people are not looking, right? The other thing is books. Now you have these books with a lot of text, like these parents of first generation learners. How are they going to look at all this text, right? For me, it's like reading French, which I maybe read for 2 years in my school, and then after that doing that. So like we used to send posters. Now we've said in any poster, there should not be more than one concept and not more than 10 words, right? That is what a poster should look like. And if that's the case, why should books not look like that, right? And so I think the design principles around what content, around what interactions work, right? That is important.
So tell me about like how Rocket Learning was formed. Like, the co-founders, I've heard there are five co-founders. Like, I've heard of 5-star, but these are like 5 stars coming together. Like, kaun hai? How did you guys come together? What's the scene on that?
we get asked this question a lot, right? Like 5 co-founders, why, how? But I actually feel we're a non-profit structure, right? So I actually feel that 5 co-founders in non-profit is better. No equity split to worry about or anything, right? And I think we've all really felt that the problems that we are solving in the social impact space are so large. They're humongous problems. In my mind, they're much more significant or difficult to solve than a lot of the for-profit problems that are getting solved. From day one, our thought was that why would you have less co-founders than non-profit? One is sort of decision-making and alignment. 2 is glory, and who gets the glory, right? And I think for us, it was really a big factor of, okay, look, glory-wise, we want to share it. We're not in it for the glory. And in terms of decision-making alignment, we feel it's good to actually have like a group of people who are imposing, with different views coming in, where not one person's view is the end-all and be-all, right?
It's almost like a board of 5 advisors, like sort of so that no one CEO can sort of move their...
And we force consensus. In fact, there's no CEO. There is no, we're all co-founders. And no one person's word is greater than somebody else's. In our own domains, we actually sort of maintain primacy, but we also accept a lot of feedback, which is often very irritating to all of us. Right? I think this is the answer, but these people think it's not. So,
इनको कुछ पता नहीं है,
right? But we accept that as the price of overall event in the long term taking good decisions, and as the price of having such good people to work with that we can move with pace, we can solve a big problem. Right? And I think that's the biggest privilege, because the biggest fear for all of us probably is that, we won't be able to solve a problem in 20 years, and, we won't make momentum, we won't move fast, we won't make progress. And so I think there are challenges of having this equal collective leadership, but the advantages have far outstripped the disadvantages.
And how are you building this next layer? How are you building the capacity? What's your internal org building, org training chart? What are you most proud of? What has worked for you?
I think the prerequisite there has to be a cultural fit. So I think a lot of time has gone into making sure that the right culture is imbibed. Culture which espouses, let's say, trust in decision making, communication, so on and so forth, right? I think that is a prerequisite. Once people sort of pass that in the first few months of their tenure at Rocket, I think then, of course, we sort of are now in the process of curating their learning journeys, because they've also been sort of thrown to the deep end in terms of managing, as you said, right, the co-founders, as well as managing difficult problems, right? And we've scaled up quite quickly. So a person who's managing, let's say, 1 district is now managing 10 districts. So it's also a journey for him or her to suddenly start managing that team. So now I think upskilling for them and capacity building has become a focus for us.
One big value is also building, whether within founders or within a slightly broader leadership group, is also building up a love bank. One of our mentors sort of gave this term, and it's really come home in our minds, that there'll be stressful times. There'll be times when things are not working, when there's a launch that's not going right, where somebody feels that, look, this other function is not doing their job well. Uske wajah se, I'm not able to make the impact that I want to have. Right?
So you have a Valentine's Day every day?
Well, not every day, but every Friday that we do is trying to be that.
Okay.
So every Friday, for example, we will sit the founders, and we'll try to sort of, we'll talk about work, but we'll just try to make sure that we're communicating. We'll try to go out for dinners. With the team also, we'll try to do offsites with the leadership team and all. And idea is that you build that trust and sort of love with each other, right? So that at bad times, it's not as if you won't have fights. You will 100% have fights. But I think that large overarching trust is there, and then we can give feedback, and we can rub off each other's
deposits into this love bank. Give me an example of what someone would do to make a deposit.
I think, just for example, there's some fellowship that multiple people want to do, or somebody wants to come to AI Dialogues or something of that sort, right? And one person says that, look, I'm okay to step back this time, why don't you go ahead and do it, right? I think actions in that way speak louder than words, right? Somebody wants to go on a holiday, that's making it hard for everybody else, but saying that, look, I will pick up this particular set of things and I will do it with good grace, or I just want this initiative to happen in this way, but I listen to your point of view at this particular point of time. So I think that's how we generally sort of look at it, and of course then there's personal stuff like dinners and this and that, right? But if you're unwell, I'll go and visit you. But so the personal can't be divorced entirely, right? So the personal has to be there, and in India especially that happens more and more. But I think these are some of the deposits that I'm thinking of.
I think giving up a point of view and being okay with it, I think is the best sort of act of that, putting things in the love bank, because at a sharing glory, I think that makes sense, and we're all sort of broadly aligned on it. But that act of giving up a point of view shows as an exemplar that it's possible to do it without really sort of bruising your own ego and all that. So I think that's really helpful.
Shows the respect you have for the other person.
I feel like you guys will be great husbands now. You've like practiced this skill so much.
I think we'll have to ask our partners about that. But sometimes it can happen that we do so much at work that home is like, nahi, my viewpoint.
So what does success look like? What's the future like? When will you pop the champagne?
Yeah, I think we're also waiting to define that more clearly. But I think largely we want to embed high quality early childhood education into the system that we are working with, right? Which is largely with governments, parents, Anganwadis. But I think we imagine sort of a political economy loop, right? I think there's a supply that we are augmenting government capacity in delivering early childhood education. And there has to be demand from the parent side of high quality ECE for their child, right? And I think they have to meet. And then once they meet, then I think there's a loop of sustenance that happens, right? Because you can't have a very good Anganwadi center and no parents sending their children. And you can't have parents sending their children and them not getting what they want, right? So I think once governments start adopting this and parents start demanding this to a level where I think even without us pushing for it, it happens, that's sort of success. But the champagne bottle might have to wait.
If you're up for it, I'd love to be a parent, and if you could give me a pitch and aim at me, on this, if that's okay with you.
So I think the pitch overall, right, at a simple level, is that look, your child is developing, their brain is developing, and they are learning new things, and they're just becoming fundamentally smarter. Their brain power is developing between the ages of 3 to 6.
हाँ, बिटिया बहुत अच्छी है, होशियार है, सबसे बात कर लेती है गांव में.
वो बहुत अच्छा है कि वो कर रही है, एंड इसकी होशियारी पे तो आपको और ज़्यादा बिल्ड करना चाहिए ताकि और भी ज़्यादा स्मार्ट हो जाए, बिकॉज अभी जो आप करोगे उसका फ़र्क पड़ेगा. आप उसके साथ टाइम स्पेंड कर रहे हैं क्या उसको पढ़ाने में? आपको लगता है आप पढ़ा सकते हैं उनको? आई नो कि आप अनपढ़ हैं.
नहीं, मेरे को तो कुछ आता नहीं है, मैं कैसे करूँगा.
हाँ, बट आपके ही मोहल्ले में 5 और माता पिता ये कर रहे हैं, और वो भी आपकी तरह ही हैं. बस वही है कि वो 20-30 मिनट कोशिश कर रहे हैं, एंड उस कोशिश के कारण जिस भी लेवल पे आज आपकी बच्ची है उससे और बेहतर हो जाएगी. और ख़ास करके स्कूल के दाखिले में, आंगनवाड़ी में जब बाकी बच्चे देखेंगे या आंगनवाड़ी सेविका देखेंगी, तो उनको भी लगेगा कि ये बच्ची ना सिर्फ बातचीत कर पा रही है, बट अक्षर की पहचान, नंबर्स की पहचान, ये सब भी बेहतर हो रही है.
अभी देखिए आपकी आंगनवाड़ी में भी जो आंगनवाड़ी मैडम हैं वो भी बहुत सारी पढ़ाई कर रही हैं, और आप व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप पे देखते भी हो कि वो क्लास में क्या पढ़ा रहे हैं. तो जैसे आपके साथ में आप देखते हो शहर में लोग घर पे होमवर्क करा रहे हैं क्लासरूम से जुड़ा हुआ, वैसे सरकार पहली बारी आपको मौका दे रही है कि आप भी अच्छी तरह होमवर्क करा सकते हो, तो आप भी इसका फ़ायदा उठाएं.
और आप करोगे तो आपको महीने के एंड में स्मार्ट परिवार बुलाया जाएगा, आपकी आंगनवाड़ी को पता चलेगा, सारे मोहल्ले को पता चलेगा कि आप और आपका बच्चा मिलके पढ़ाई कर रहे हैं. तो आप अपने ही दिनचर्या में कुछ 20 मिनट का समय निकाल के कुछ एक गतिविधि कर लो. वो गतिविधियाँ आपको अपने फ़ोन पे भी मिल जाएंगी कि आप कैसे कर सकते हो.
नहीं, ये बात तो सही है, जितना मेहनत करेंगे उसका फल तो आएगा ही. Okay, cool. So you're essentially like what I sort of absorbed from this conversation as a. First of all, thank you for doing this.
So the googly, the smart kid is googly, because normally the smart kids' parents they do it, but the not so smart ones do.
I'm a smart kid and I'm motivated, but I don't want to.
But what I absorbed from the conversation is like, one is I think you're sort of motivating the parent that they can play a role that fits in their lifestyle, right? Like, I mean, you are asking me to do a little bit more, but it's not a big deviance from sort of what I'm doing.
सब्जी मंडी जा रहे हो तो लेके जाओ और वहाँ दिखाओ कि क्या-क्या चीजें हरी रंग की हैं, लाल रंग की हैं,
right,
या क्या कितना कॉस्ट है उनका.
So I think that's one part that I resonated with, right? Like you cornered me by sort of saying that. Second is I think you're in a good way playing on this fear of being left behind when you're comparing it to other children in the village, to richer parents, and I said fear in a good way, right? It's a good motivator also sometimes. And I think the third is sort of you are explaining that like it has to start now, not like take it for granted that just by going to the Anganwadi or the school, it will automatically get. And even when I'm saying I have a smart kid, you're saying, but it can be smarter, right? So on a relative basis, you're always pushing them a little bit more, which is hard to disagree with. Like, what's your number one reason a parent does not buy into Rocket and what it does? Like, what's the biggest reason you found that you failed at?
I think the biggest reason is probably lack of confidence. Then the other thing that becomes a big issue is habit building. I start doing it, but I fall off. Issue with all EdTech, right? I mean, at Mindspark, you know more than us, and you can build. And Mindspark is a fantastic product but even I'm sure even there are dropouts, right? People don't do that. Same way that we go to gyms and we don't do exercise, right? We know it's important and all that, but you have to build that environment around that. So the second part we've tried to solve in various ways. For example, I think the early adopter principle works well on a group. Right? Normally, if you send a message to 10 people, maybe one person is an early adopter. Here, what happens is that one person sends stuff on a group. Others see that we can do it. So, in our conversation, we were clumsily trying to relay that, साथ वाले भी कर रहे हैं, आप भी कर सकते हो, it's not so difficult. They are seeing, मेरा neighbor कर रहा है यार, and they are not super sort of literate. So that early adopter makes 3 other people come in.
This reminds me of that Sharma ji ka beta joke, right? Like, would be constantly being compared to Sharma ji ka beta kar sakte ho. Like, this is almost for the parent. Sharma ji kar sakte to aap kyun nahi kar sakte, right?
So to really find out what will influence and then change it. So this confidence thing that Azeez was mentioning, we realized we built like an index of breaking down behaviors. Is it your attitude? Is it your confidence? Do you not have the strategy to engage? And if you realize that confidence is the gap, then we make these campaigns called मम्मी है सब जानती हैं, मतलब मम्मी बोल रही हैं तो कर लो, वो सही है, right? And a mother discovering the journey of that I can actually do it. I want to do it is there. You're right, but can I do it and will I do it is something that we need to go to.
Some of this we can't fully do ourselves also. I think there has to be a broader social view around it. Right, and so we try to build it, but for example, if your peers are not saying that 3 to 6 is important or something, right, which is why we did this campaign with Suresh Raina, the Indian cricketer, talking about the importance of learning at this age. Maybe a Virat Kohli can say, look, I spend time with my kids, right, like with my 3-year-old daughter, I'm spending time because it's so important. So I think those things are important, and then people, so it's a circle, right, like government pushes, then people pull. Politicians need to feel that this is important and I will get votes eventually for it, right? And I think that circular economy and, in that light, would love to, you worked with government for a long time. What makes governments interested in doing something and to sustain doing it?
Yeah. I think governments are motivated by, if they can see replicability at scale. One of the challenges I have faced in sort of espousing for, let's say, a Mindspark or an adaptive learning software, and I've failed at, is because they say, I have 40,000 schools, you're saying you need 40 tablets in each, this results in, let's say, 300 crores of capex investment per year. And so I think government gets motivated if they can see something that can scale easily, like they can flick a switch and it's on tomorrow for all the students. I think that has been one motivator. I think second is if it fits into the current capacity of the system to execute on it, which means if they feel that my current teacher, my current principal, my current skill level of the block officer, district officer can pull this off, right? Third, I guess, is how easy is it to procure you, right, or work with you? I mean, some foundations come with saying, you don't have to pay us anything, we'll raise our own funding. So that's obviously an easier path. But if you are, see, the scarcest resource today is an IS officer's time to run a tender, right? Because it's fraught with all kinds of, nefarious players making cases, and so an IS officer would have to really be motivated and bought in.
There is capacity.
To put his skin in the game and neck on the line to be able to take out a tender that has enough caveats that they get the right person, keep the ones out, and don't get challenged in court and things of that nature. So that, it's really like the path of least resistance as I sort of scale up this in the thing.
That is actually super insightful. Like the third one we haven't had to deal with right now. But the first two are important, right? The resonant frequency model has to be simple enough and in sync with what they're doing. So I think that's something we've tried to really focus. We have a lot of temptation to make it more and more complicated. And then we say, nahi ho paega, And for example, temptation is one person in a district, let's get 20 people in the district. We have the funds for it. Some CSR is saying, kar lo. Right? And we say, no, man, because that's not going to then replicate. But then the first thing, right? I think if parents start, tablets, at least the good thing is that parents see tablets and computer-based learning ho rahi hai. Right? And in our case, they see that parent, the system is sending me something to do, which maybe even private system doesn't do. Right? I think that's very powerful as compared to a system where, book has become better. What do I know? The book has become better, yeah. Or I'm doing like really like, I'm dividing children into groups and they're learning. Yeah. It's fantastic, it works. But as a parent, I don't, what is happening, right?
Yeah.
So I think
I face that with, let's say, we are trying to improve the quality of questions in a test paper, right? And I feel like a good quality question is the most underrated thing, because in most people's minds, the question is the question is the question. So it's been easier and harder, right? Like let's say with board exam reform, one thing we're telling the government is at zero marginal cost to you, right? Changing a question in a question paper doesn't cost you anything more than what you're already spending today in terms of printing, grading, things of that nature. Second is people are used to taking a test and answering questions, so we're not asking for a behavior change there. But I think there the biggest fear is, if I do this, if marks fall, if pass percentages fall, will parents sort of stand up in arms, will sort of there be this revolt? And then, so we're trying to see, can we provide a long ramp? So instead of saying, change the paper tomorrow, we're saying over 5 years, can you change half the paper, right? And so you provide like a notice a year or two ahead to the parents saying 2 साल के बाद ये reform होगा, and 5 साल के बाद we will reach the destination, allows to be a bit more palatable as we work on this. And then finally, I think it's also like we have 55 plus boards in India, right? And so sometimes when you're trying to change a board, it's like और कौन कर रहा है? And so if you can get one, and then you can say CBSE bhi kar raha hai, ICSE bhi kar raha hai, Gujarat board bhi kar raha hai, so can you also do it? Then I think that's another thing that we found works in the government.
Okay. Can I come on one of the success factors also, just to add on what Siddhant said earlier, or success things, is, we want to work on this high quality early childhood education system. And what we're seeing, and one of the reasons we started working on this is also that with policy mandates out and all that, right, governments are going to do something with the preschool system in the country. Something's going to happen, right? And it may take 10 years, and it's possible that in 10 years something totally random could come up, right? And so for us, the exciting thing is that can you restrict that time from 10 to 5 years and make sure that the system that comes up is a well-functioning one from scratch, rather than the work we all do, and we've all been after primary school education and saying let's repair it, and amazing organizations, EI and Pratham and CSF, and we work in grade 1, 2 and 3. And just trying to repair that and change mindsets and change curriculum is just so hard, right? So I think what we are saying is, look, from a very businessy perspective, right? There's a clear market, and maybe I'm attracting a lot of people in the market, but I like it, right? Through EI dialogues, it's good if more people come, but there's a clear market. There's a demand from the system. There's not too many players who are able to do much on it. We worked with 50,000 Anganwadi workers during COVID for home learning, and we became one of the biggest players in the system. Right? And people said, yes, come, because nobody else we know has worked with 50,000 Anganwadi workers. So I think the motivation is, let's really strike now rather than waste these 5 years. We're in 9 states, and often we get questions, why the hell are you going to 9 states? Just finish, like we're in 9 states and 20% of each of these states. Why don't you just stay in one, finish it off? And we're saying, look, the foundations for what happens in that state is going to get set now. Like later we can come back 3 years later and say you did it all wrong and you do this. Rather than that, we'd like to set something at the state and then work in 20% districts to do it, but at least the state knows broadly what to do, at least in our not so humble opinion.
But in order to chase this success, what's in it for you? I mean, why are you guys doing this? Why did you start this? Like, what's your motivation?
So I worked in the private sector quite a bit, and I think amassed my pot of gold. So I'm very clear on at least my financial priorities. I never want to own like a Ferrari or a house or anything. I'm very sorted on that. But I do think that if you use all the skills that we have, courtesy of our education, privilege, as well as our experience, I think for a better cause, that remains like an overarching principle. But I do think that all of us believe that we want to build something which will outlast us as well in that sense. So part glory, I would say, and part also trying to solve a really difficult problem, and while benefiting sort of our nation, right? I think that's sort of like a trifactor. But I think personally for me, I think, let's say there are some elements within our problem which appeal more, right? Like behavior change as a problem for low-income demographics, right? Which need not be restricted to India in the future, can be extrapolated to other sort of countries globally as well. How do you really build that problem out? Sort of take it apart and then really understand and build a playbook which can outlast your own personal efforts, right?
I think you have to enjoy the process, you have to enjoy the business challenge, the intellectual stimulation. These problems are big, they've not been solved. I think the stimulation is is high. We don't have the misfortune to have to let money dictate our wishes, right? If we have the fortune that money doesn't really matter, right? Because of family circumstances, because of our own individual preferences, then why not go after the most freaking difficult problem and see what you can do in that. And I think finally, like the feeling of working on a thing that makes you want to get up, with a team that sort of motivates you, that you're happy to work with, I think those things really have worked for us.
So let's say, both of you went to IIT Delhi, and let's say you're juniors today who are in their third or fourth year, job hunting. Any thoughts for them? Any frameworks as they pick their first job, as they interview? What would you tell the Siddhant and Azeez of 10, 15 years ago when you were a rising senior? Like, if you were to go back and talk to your younger self, what would you tell them?
I think, what I would say is that I think be very clear, if you are looking at the social sector at all, be very clear why you're looking at it. So do it for the right reasons, don't do it for any misplaced sense of glamour, right? Do it because you like the challenge, and also make sure that your family and that your personal finances can deal with it, right? So be at the point, right? Like for me, it was early. For Siddhant, it was after he'd spent more time working at BCG. We both came to it, right? People like Ashish Dhawan came to it even later, and the impact they've been made is super outsized, even after that. So see the right time for you. I personally believe some amount of business exposure in the corporate sector is useful. And that, I think, helps build skill sets of different sorts and builds your brand and credibility. And this is going to be a long career. So don't be in too much of a hurry. Like spend 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, right? And then come to this when you feel that you are sort of ready from a skill perspective, from a financial perspective, from interest perspective. Try it out. You may like it, you may not. Like we see 50% people going somewhere else. We have this, a lot of people who go to B school and then, go into the for-profit sector, which is great, which is fine.
Yeah, I think the initial few years are really important for upskilling. So I think you should optimize for that. I would have optimized for that, right? In terms of learning the basic ropes of any job environment. And I think for that, private sector companies do a good job, right? Although there are more companies in the development sector than I would have imagined. And now that we keep interacting, I think there are way more opportunities than are sort of visible to the eye, especially in terms of people graduating from undergrad or even postgrad sort of universities. So I think do a little bit more digging in terms of whether there are more roles out there. You might not be in the right networks or right forums, right? But you need to sort of talk a lot more with people who who are in the sector for you to form an informed opinion. I do think that in social sector, a lot of people come from a place of passion, right? And I keep repeating this whenever I go to like IIT Delhi or IIM Calcutta for any sort of alum talks, is that passion is not born, it's built. You're not going to discover your passion being at the same level 10 years ago. It's not possible. I mean, people talk about, I was born with this passion and I'm just going to do it. That generally doesn't happen. So yeah.
Do you have a lodestar like that, Pranav? Not putting you on the spot, but like something that keeps you going?
My battery charger is visits to the field, talking to the students, seeing work in action, or seeing work not making an impact, right? For me, I think I just wake up the best after a trip to the field, seeing schools, students, teachers in action, and just sort of reminds me of why I've chosen to do this. It's a good renewal of vows. And I still feel like, the people like us who have gotten the best of education in the world, the best use of our education is to provide a support system for others to get a good education. And our IIT, MBA, HBS degrees are the best risk insurance we could ever have hoped for in terms of, if we were sleeping on the streets again. So that's what's in it for me. But this was great. Such a pleasure to connect with like-minded folks. Thank you, Siddhant. Thank you, Azeez, for coming and talking and sharing your wisdom with us. Thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Pranav.
Yeah.
Thanks so
Thanks,
much.
Azeez. Thanks, Siddhant.